Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Ephraim Graham.
And I'm Charlene Aaron. A mass of burning lava is threatening to swallow up homes in Hawaii. The flow of burning rock from the Kailua volcano advanced overnight and is moving at a speed of 10 to 15 yards an hour. Residents in its path have been urged to leave as the river of fire moves closer. The 2,000-degree river of lava is oozing closer to the town of Pahoa, now in the backyards of residents' homes.
Pretty heartbreaking. It's pretty sad, yeah. We don't know what's going to happen from now on. Over here, we had it since 1904. Yeah, so it's been a while, so to see it go, it would really change things in life.
Dozens of homes, businesses, and other structures are near the lava flow, and residents are on a moment's notice to evacuate as the melted rock closes in. Sarah Williams' home is just 300 yards away from the fiery flow.
It's totally devastating. I'm still hoping it doesn't come to this property.
The stream from the Kailua volcano has been inching toward the village of 1,000 people for weeks. It's traveled some 90 yards in the last 24 hours. So far, it's only destroyed a garden shed and metal materials. It has also overrun a cemetery on the edge of town. Teams of scientists are monitoring the lava that's now less than a quarter mile from the town's main road. Crews are building temporary access roads to protect Highway 130, traveled by as many as 10,000 cars a day. City workers are clipping power lines as a precaution, as a number of methane explosions have been reported. Meanwhile, tires smoldering in a rubbish heap have officials worried about air quality. Chemists are checking the air to make sure it's safe to breathe. And the National Guard has been called in to assist with patrolling roadblocks today.
A nurse in Maine is challenging that state's request. She quarantined herself at home for 21 days following her work in the Ebola hot zone. Casey Hickox says she is prepared to sue. Hickox is also the nurse who challenged New Jersey's governor when she was placed in isolation upon her arrival at Newark Airport last week. She is now back at home in Maine, one of 9 states with stricter guidelines for those returning from West Africa. And state police are monitoring her movements. So far, Hickox has not tested positive for Ebola, and Wednesday she defied the mandatory quarantine and came outside to speak with reporters in her front yard.
If these restrictions are not removed for me from the state of Maine by Thursday morning, I will go to court to attain my freedom.
Meanwhile, a Spanish teacher in Metro Atlanta schools was placed in quarantine away from students until she is medically cleared. The school made the move after learning her husband had traveled to an area of West Africa facing the Ebola outbreak.
A Liberian health official says the country is making progress in its fight against Ebola. On Wednesday, the World Health Organization said Ebola infections in Liberia could be declining by as much as 25% a week. An assistant health minister confirms the disease isn't spreading as fast as before. He said it's too soon to celebrate, but there aren't as many confirmed cases of Ebola, and workers are picking up fewer bodies off the street. Nearly 14,000 people have contracted Ebola in West Africa, more than 6,500 of them in Liberia.
A 29-year-old terminally ill woman has set her own date to die. Brittany Maynard plans to end her life this Saturday by taking advantage of Oregon's physician-assisted suicide law. Paul Strand has the latest on this high-profile right-to-die case.
Brittany Maynard is a young newlywed making headlines for choosing to end her life on her own terms. Doctors diagnosed her with terminal brain cancer in April and gave her 6 months to live. She doesn't want to wait that long.
I plan to be surrounded by my immediate family, which is my husband and my mother and my stepfather and my best friend, who's also a physician. I will die upstairs in my bedroom that I share with my husband.
Maynard moved to Oregon to take advantage of the state's assisted suicide law. Doctors there prescribed her a life-ending medication she plans to take on November 1st. Maynard's controversial decision landed her on the cover of People magazine and in the center of a moral and ethical debate over assisted suicide. Currently, 5 states allow patients the right to physician-assisted suicide. Opponents in both the medical field and the faith community want changes to the law.
My heart goes out to Brittany. Honestly, it does. But I would pray that before she swallows that prescription, I would tell her about how the love of Jesus has sustained me.
Joni Erickson Tata is a quadriplegic and a breast cancer survivor. She wrote an open letter to Maynard begging her to reconsider.
The reason I wrote that letter was to not so much influence Brittany, although I hope it does, but to influence the untold thousands of others who now feel that physician-assisted suicide could very well be an option for them.
Many in the medical community agree the so-called death with dignity law creates a slippery slope for physicians and patients. A recent poll by the New England Medical Journal says 67% of doctors oppose assisted suicide. Dr. David Prentice here at the Family Research Council says laws like the one in Oregon open the floodgates to larger ethical issues.
For health professionals, these types of laws pervert the medical field because it takes that do no harm idea and turns it upside down where you are intentionally harming the patient.
Maynard and other advocates of the law argue that it allows patients to maintain their dignity even in the face of a gruesome death. They also say the right to choose death can ease the financial burden of the medical bills for loved ones left behind. Christian author Kara Tippett disagrees. Tippett, a terminally ill mother of 4, says by choosing assisted suicide, Maynard may be doing her loved ones more harm than good. In an open letter, she writes, "In your choosing your own death, you are robbing those that love you with such tenderness, the opportunity of meeting you in your last moments and extending you love in your last breaths."
I just wanted her to know that her breath matters, and that her life matters, and that we see her, and that she's important, and that she's loved.
Maynard stands by her decision and hopes it will build momentum to extend the law throughout the country. While she may be the new face of this debate, opponents say her story has reawakened the decades-old fight over the culture of life. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Houston's mayor has withdrawn her subpoena demanding pastors surrender their private communications. Mayor Anise Parker is a lesbian and had targeted 5 pastors as part of a lawsuit over a pro-gay ordinance. The religious leaders said the subpoenas violated their First Amendment rights. Parker says her demands were not meant to infringe on anyone's religious freedoms, but she kicked off a national firestorm after she first demanded the pastors turn over their sermons.
If the mayor thought the subpoenas were wrong, she would have pulled them immediately, not waited until she was forced to by national outrage.
Mayor, if you really believe in trying to not just head fake and not just put lipstick on a pig, but actually finally once and for all doing the right thing, then pull down your defense, acknowledge the validity of our petition.
Opponents of the ordinance say they're still fighting for justice after Parker blocked a petition that would have given voters a say about the gay ordinance. And legal scholars say Parker's agenda highlights a disturbing trend of violating constitutional rights. An assistant dean at George Mason University School of Law said, quote, "She represents a small but thriving portion of our society that thinks government may and should intrude on religious liberty to force upon citizens political dogma."
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is on the defensive, saying he's under fire because he won't compromise the safety of his country. Those were his first public remarks after an interview quoted a senior Obama administration official calling Netanyahu a curse word that starts with chicken. The official told The Atlantic the good thing about Netanyahu is that he's scared to launch wars, but the bad thing is he won't accommodate the Palestinians or Sunni Arab states. Another senior White House official said Netanyahu is a coward on nuclear Iran and won't launch a preemptive strike.
Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas called Israel's closure of the Temple Mount to visitors a declaration of war. Israel closed the area following the assassination attempt Wednesday night of a top advocate for Jewish prayer on the contested compound. Thursday, Israeli police clashed with Palestinian rioters after Israeli security killed the suspected shooter. CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell has this story.
Yehuda Glick just finished a lecture at the Begin Center in central Jerusalem as part of an event entitled Israel Returns to the Temple Mount.
From what we know is part of the ongoing investigation, the assassination was planned ahead of time.
The assassin apparently identified Glick before shooting him at close range and escaping on a motorcycle. Glick is a leading advocate of more Jewish access to the Temple Mount and for the right of Jews to pray there. It's the place where 2 successive Jewish temples sat. The second was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans.
It's a result of the Israeli policy that not let Jews pray on the Temple Mount, a policy that sends a signal to the Arabs that they can continue attack in many ways those Jews who wants to go to the most holiest place, to Judaism on earth, to the Temple Mount and pray.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says there'll be no change of the status quo on the Temple Mount. Only Muslims are allowed to pray there, known in Arabic as the Noble Sanctuary. The site currently hosts the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Golden Dome of the Rock Shrine. The incident is the latest in growing violence surrounding the Temple Mount. Israeli officials accuse Palestinian leaders of incitement to violence over the site, including Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas, who called on Palestinians to use all means to prevent Jews from entering the compound. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, exploiting young girls for a feminist cause. Is this offensive ad campaign the perfect example of how not to treat girls and women?
New numbers show the Affordable Care Act could actually be making health care less affordable. That's according to a study of insurance premiums. The Washington Times reports average Obamacare premiums have skyrocketed for some groups as much as 78%. The study found average insurance premiums for men in the 23-year-old demographic rose 78.2%, and women in that same age group saw premiums rise 44.9%. The study conducted by Health Pocket examined average healthcare premiums before and after the implementation of Obamacare in 2013.
An internet video supposedly promoting gender equality is accused of exploiting young girls. F-Bombs for Feminism features girls dressed up as princesses and using profanity to rant about pay inequality and sexual abuse. Here's a bleeped out version.
Pretty. Pretty. What the f? I'm not the pretty helpless princess in distress. I'm pretty powerful and ready for success. So what is more offensive? A little girl saying or the unequal and sexist way society treats girls and women.
And Dr. Linda Mental joins us now to talk about this. Linda, needless to say, this is very shocking.
It is, and on the one hand, I hate giving them even the slightest promotion of that video, but we do need to be talking about it because of what it means in our culture.
Is it child abuse?
Yeah, it actually is, because I looked up the federal definition of child abuse, and if it says any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker which results in emotional harm or exploitation. And if you watch that video, it is so clear that they are exploiting those young girls. There's no way that those young girls would know to use that language, to talk like that, to have that attitude. So they're obviously being coached by some producer and parents who are in agreement with doing that.
That brings us to our next question. Why would any parent agree to allow their child to do this?
Well, the only thing I can think of is that it probably has to do with money. And so if you're a parent and you're thinking, oh, I have a little child actress and I'm going to, honey, it's kind of like what they say to adults, you might have to do this nude scene, but it's part of what you have to do for your career. Yeah. Although adults have the right to decide and to choose, and a child does not have the capacity to say, this is good for me, not good for me. The parent is responsible for that. So I'm guessing that there was some kind of promise of money or fame, which is so huge in our culture today.
What kind of impact would something like this have on the girls in the video?
That is the scariest part of this to me, because once you put something on video and it is out there, it is not retractable. And so for the rest of their lives, those little girls are going to be marked by this kind of video that's going to follow them where they go. And once they find out what they were actually saying and what they meant, and the one part that's really disturbing that you and I were talking about as we were watching that is this part where they're talking about how awful it is to be sexually assaulted by a male, but they're using sexually assaultive language towards men to bring that point out. So the whole thing is so wrong and so disturbing.
It's really disturbing. And feminism is supposed to be about empowering women, but clearly they're not concerned about the girls in the video.
No, and there's nothing empowering about this. If nothing else, it's teaching girls to be disrespectful, to use coarse and horrible language towards another person. It's exactly the opposite of empowering you. It's very cruel, in my opinion, to what they're doing to those girls.
Wow. And Linda, here we are talking about which is what they're aiming for, about the girls being, so vulgar and everything, but this really does need to be exposed.
It really does. And I hope that anybody who watches that on YouTube would write in and say, this is horrible, horrific. I hope somebody legally goes after these producers under this idea of child abuse and exploitation. I took this to one of my lawyer friends, and she said they could have a case. So if you're out there and you're watching it and you want to take on something, be a great cause.
I think a lot of people would back that
They
effort,
would.
definitely. Dr. Linda Mendel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Up next, the Kansas governor who won in a landslide 4 years ago may now be losing ground. An inside look at the tight race in the Sunflower State. That story is coming up next. As Election Day nears, it appears there's more potential problems for Democrats. Politico reports the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee is putting money into races even in liberal districts long thought to be safe for them. Democrats are worried they could lose even more seats than expected. Republicans point out many races remain close in both the House and in the Senate.
Well, he was a Republican senator from Kansas who became the governor, and he was elected in a landslide. But now Sam Brownback could face defeat in a re-election battle that shows the divisions in the state's Republican Party. David Brody brings us that story from Kansas.
Yeah. Good to see you.
Sam Brownback is seen as a happy-go-lucky guy.
Wow, good to see you guys.
But times aren't so happy right now for the Kansas governor. He faces a tight race in what is usually considered a safe place for Republicans.
It's been tough.
The problem centers on the economy. His critics say it's in shambles, but Brownback says not so fast.
We are strong in this state, but transitions are hard.
That transition began in 2010 when the former senator brought his Tea Party style of conservatism to Kansas. In 2012, the governor helped pass the biggest tax cut in America during the last 20 years. He said it would lead to economic growth, but so far, the results aren't there.
He was very forthright about this, almost too forthright. He said this was an experiment.
We'll see how it works. We'll have a real live experiment.
While Brownback implemented spending cuts, there weren't enough to make up for the loss in tax revenue.
If you're going to cut revenue, then you also need to adjust spending. It wasn't done.
The state's bond rating has been downgraded, and critics say by 2016, the projected budget deficit will reach almost $240 million. Brownback backers say only part of the story is being told. They point out that when he took office, the state already faced a shortfall of $550 million. Now, 4 years later, 55,000 jobs have been created, and the unemployment rate stands at 4.9%. That's below the national average.
Tax policy takes some time for it to work. We'd always projected declining revenues for 2 years. Always have projected that.
Pain for education has also been an issue here. Democrat Paul Davis is hitting his opponent for cutting classroom spending. Brownback denies that, saying overall education spending is actually up.
They lied about it.
One thing is for sure, the governor's changes led to a number of moderate Republicans jumping ship. Winter set up Republicans for Kansas Values to back Brownback's opponent because they've seen enough of a downward spiral.
We don't want to wait any longer. To wait longer would be irresponsible. It would be sort of the equivalent of Wizard of Oz clicking our heels 3 times and hoping, magically this all works. But it hasn't, and it won't.
How disappointed were you in these moderate Republicans we hear so much about that kind of jump ship and have decided to support your opponent here? What was that like for you?
Well, for a number of them, this isn't their first rodeo. They supported Kathleen Sebelius for governor first time around. And many of them, not all of them, but many of them support tax increases and Obamacare.
This shapes up as a battle over the role of government. Trabert says big government politicians are threatened.
It's about we don't want this form of government, this citizen-focused, better service, better price government to kick in because it changes the culture of how government operates.
The race really does shine a light on the intense fight for control between conservatives and moderates within the Republican Party. A new Gallup poll shows 38% of Kansans are conservative, but an almost equal amount, 36%, say they're moderate. Out of the top 10 Republican voting states, Kansas ranked the least conservative of all of them.
Will Kansas go back to a somewhat more moderate conservative stance where it's been over the last 40 or 50 years?
Brownback further alienated moderates in 2012 when he supported conservative Republican challengers over moderate incumbents in order to tilt the legislature in his favor.
He decided that some of the people with the same colored jerseys on, he wanted off the team.
Brownback is pushing back.
Then why do I have moderates in the cabinet?
And like sharks smelling blood in the water, enemies are hitting from all sides.
I think the left is just so desperate to see, they want this model to fail so bad.
This whole political ordeal has tested the governor's faith, no doubt about it.
I like to tell people I've been growing, which is what's taking place.
But Brownback is moving full steam ahead. Because the way Brownback sees it, he didn't become governor just to take up space.
When you hire a new coach or a CEO of a company, you don't tell them, look, we're kind of in decline, just manage the decline well, don't make it hurt too much, okay? You hire them to say, look, change this place, get it going the right way, build it, let's grow.
Governor?
That's a message he hopes will keep him around as governor until the cows come home. David Brody, CBN News, near Topeka, Kansas.
Now, CBN News will have live coverage online next Tuesday. You can find all the latest updates and analysis at cbnnews.com as well as on Facebook and Twitter. So be sure to check out our special coverage beginning at 7 o'clock on election night. Finally this hour, CBN Asia recently celebrated its 20-year anniversary.
That's right. About 400 partners, donors, guests, and friends came together to celebrate the occasion. For the last 2 decades, CBN Asia has been programming and proclaiming Christ and transforming lives in the Philippines. Superbook is one program that's been making an impact there. There are nearly 1 million Facebook fans, and so far, more than 34,000 kids and parents have committed their lives to Jesus Christ. And you can find out more about what CBN is doing around the world by logging on to cbn.com/international. And that's going to do it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
Tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you join us again right here next time. It's Thursday. Make it a thankful one.